cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities.
My budget includes the largest increase in defense spending in 2 decades, because while the price of freedom and security is high, it is never too high. Whatever it costs to defend our country, we will pay.
I got started looking for this after reading a paper about opportunity cost neglect. Opportunity cost is all about comparing this option versus another. Some comparisons are straightforward, like Samsung or iPhone. Some are only obvious in hindsight.
But this opportunity cost is something that is very hard for us to envision, very hard for us to think about, very hard for us to actually realize the trade-off that we're making.
In the first study, they asked students if they would buy a DVD. In both groups, the option to buy was listed, but the second option to not buy was changed between the two groups. In one group, it just said not buy. In the other group, they put not buy and save $15. When they made the switch, when they made it explicit that they could save the money, the buy option went from 75% down to 55%. In the second study, they asked about buying an iPod. They said, would you like to buy a 32 gigabyte iPod? Would you like to buy a 16 gigabyte iPod? Or would you rather not buy either? And in the two groups, the one with explicit savings and the one with implicit savings, about half the students choose not to buy either one. But when they included the explicit part, they wrote, would you like to pocket the extra $100 that you would save in buying a 16 gigabyte one rather than a 32 gigabyte one? It totally changed the buying habits. You went from having 32% buy the larger one to only 13%. It was a major shift. Even when the students had to put their own money on the line, as they did in the third study, they still chose to save their money more. They chose to buy less when it was explicit, when their savings were pointed out in black and white. When students were offered to buy a mug for $10 or buy a slightly inferior mug for $4, 60% of them chose the $10 mug, but when they were reminded of the savings, only 40% bought the more expensive one, and the students saved the difference and put it in their pocket. What the researchers found was that except for tightwads, who almost always chose the cheaper option, people largely don't consider opportunity costs. When they do consider opportunity costs, they tend to spend less. However, they only spend less if there is a good choice. In another study, when participants were primed that their savings could afford them a trip to Des Moines, Iowa, they didn't choose the cheaper option as often. One conclusion from this is that cheaper brands should cue consumers into the opportunity cost. The researchers note that there was once an IKEA advertisement that showed the IKEA cabinet full of shoes, noting that this is what you can buy if you spend less at IKEA. Cheaper brands should also bundle their things. If you were an account executive for a television, you should point out how cheap your television is and how good Netflix looks on it and why you can pay for Netflix with all the savings. Expensive brands should downplay. De Beers has an ad that says, redo the kitchen next year, buy the dining. And they conclude by bringing us back to where we started. Expensive brands, expensive things should minimize the costs. Both presidents did a really good job of debating their point. Eisenhower tried to make it vivid. He tried to articulate. He tried to show in very clear terms what the opportunity cost of another bomber was. Bush, on the other hand, he tried to keep it in vague terms. He wasn't specific about the costs of the Iraq War. Both of these are really good techniques for trying to convince people of your points.